Today, I am going to be talking about my leadership action plan. So, I wanted to start by talking about what factors have influenced my current leadership approach. So, when we are looking at our crucible moment, this is what I really wanted to focus on what has really affected my leadership. My crucible moment was transferring my freshman year of college. It was a situation that I felt went against my core values and my morals. And it was really tough for me because it was a dream of mine to play Division One basketball. And I felt as though I had to choose between a dream and who I really was as a person. And that's why I chose this quote from our True North textbook, which is the skills required to conquer adversity and emerge stronger and more committed than ever. These are the same ones that make for extraordinary leaders. And I think that that is so true for what comes out of your crucible moment and really just affects who you are going to be as a leader. And so that is where my core values, I wrote out who my core values kind of came from. Definitely my mother and father. I also wanted to very much touch on good coaches and bad coaches. I know I've said this before, but when you have maybe coaches that you don't like playing for, you learn almost more than what you learn when you're playing for a good coach. You're kind of learning what maybe you don't want to do. And then I also will touch on the situational approach as to that's really going to affect mine moving forward, because I think this is very prevalent for being a coach. How I can be an authentic leader, I focused on the Bill George practical approach that we read about in our North House textbook. And these are the four that the textbook gives us for the practical approach. And I really wanted to focus on the third one, which is relationship focused. I think that building rapport with players and students is the key aspect of being an authentic leader. If you can create those strong relationships, it really creates this sense of motivation in your players or students, because you are able to be authentic and connect with them and show that what they care about matters to you as well. So, how are my actions and my approach to leadership congruent with the code of ethics I developed for this course? I chose to pick the quote from our textbook, that you need to practice values in a consistent way that brings meaning to your life and your work. So based on my core values, which are loyalty, committed, innovative, and strong-willed, my approach and my code of ethics is going to be very relationship-based. I will follow the situational approach and just true consistency in my leadership. So my code of ethics was very much focused on consistency within my core values and not straying from them, so that my followers are know what is expected from me and of them. The next thing I will talk about is my community of interest, which I chose as the Washburn University women's basketball team. So our current boundaries that we have experienced recently, at the beginning of our season, there is a communication gap between the administration and the coaching staff with the changing protocols and COVID and how we were to handle that just as a staff and as a department. And this really affected the athletes' ability to be informed on game procedures, practice structure, because this really threw a loop in the consistency of what they were seeing before COVID, especially for the returners. So when this was happening, we felt that this was a very big boundary because athletes lost faith in our ability to provide them the correct information, how to handle this constraint that was happening within our community of interest. So since then, we have now adjusted our information stream due to this initial boundary that we were experiencing. So where does the nexus of interaction exist within the organization? There's a few different areas that we have, which are coach to player, and player to player. And so, where this happens the most is when we have coaches' meetings, we definitely need to have communication that is sound as to our plans for where we are going that week or even that day. Film meetings are another big one. This is coach to player. We need to be consistent in what we are telling our players so that they know what to expect moving forward from there. And then player to player is really when this happens in practice. They need to know how to interact with one another and really what to expect with one another in our organization. How is a voice given to diversity? So we actually have team meetings based on social things that are happening in our world. So we had, the one that comes to mind is we had a team meeting on the anniversary of the March on Washington. We felt that it was very important for us to talk about as a team, especially with the race relations that are pretty much very similar to what we were seeing during that time period. And we also felt that this was an important time for our girls of color to share their experiences with the team. And this allowed for growth for our girls, and a lot of our girls haven't experienced this. And so to experience that story, we felt was really important for growth within our organization. This, we felt like, creates a culture of engagement and respect amongst all of our girls, especially with the diversity amongst our team. We felt that it was very important, and especially for possibly marginalized players to share their experiences with their teammates and coaches. So what symbolic relationships currently exist within the organization? There are a few: our team captains and our head coach, assistant coaches and the head coach and athletic director, and the athletic director and the president of the university. These are all really intertwined within one another based on especially the decisions that are happening with COVID all the time. We need to have very consistent communication within all of these relationships. I talked about this in my discussion post, but I felt as though initially we were in a very much a state of disequilibrium. We were having games being canceled the day before. Our testing protocols were constantly changing. Safety guidelines were constantly changing, and this was all very new. And so we did not know how to really handle this, especially with the lack of communication that we found was happening. So out of this disequilibrium, we found an equilibrium. We now are meeting with our athletic trainers daily on protocols. We test multiple times now, so we are very familiar with how that works. And so our girls have also created a comfortability in that. And so it's created this new wave of stability. And so the book talks about this cusp of change, and we really had to go through trial and error to reach this stability within our program. So we needed to improve communication, and that was amongst administration, athletic trainers, and also really with what our players were needing. How is positive deviance perceived within the community? I chose to talk about player to player, and when a player has an issue or a problem that they're undertaking, they have really found that comfort in their teammate to lean on for guidance, and this is really accepted within our community. And what does the social network of this organization look like? We have quite a few. We have coaches to parents. So this is really our more extended social network where we need to be communicating, especially now with COVID protocols, and just something as simple as who is allowed in each home game, who is allowed in each away game. Recruiting and social media is a big part of our job. And so this idea of social media has really become a large source for our community, and then coaches and the athletic department as well. So what are the elements of our system? We have our micro system, which is our women's basketball team, our meso, which is athletic department, and then our macro system, which is the university as a whole. The last thing I will be talking about is my action plan for how I will provide effective leadership within my community of interest. So, the first thing I'll talk about are my strengths that I believe that I bring to the table in my leadership. Very relationship based. I feel as though that is a strength of mine to create relationships and therefore create motivation within my followers. I will also follow the situational approach, which I believe to be a strength of mine as well. Assessing what are my followers' needs and then adapting my leadership skills to my followers' needs. And then just consistency in my leadership. This is a strength of mine, but I feel as though this can always be an improvement in anyone's leadership process. Also creating an ecology of innovation. As Goldstein, we read in the textbook, this is an experiment that move away from normal routines. This is really hard in your leadership process. So a couple of things and ways that I will work on this in my process is student assistants introducing more scouting reports and team bonding exercises, just because they are younger and they might have different ideas that they bring to the table other than the consistent and the usual of what we have been doing in our program for so long. Also changing practice plans that fit the situation. So maybe we've done practices a certain way for a number of years. This means that we need to adapt it based on the day-to-day situation. And then the last one is players challenging the coaching staff to do things differently. I think this is something that can absolutely be worked on in our community of interest. We just have, again, been doing things very similarly ever since I was even a player. And so for players to have that voice to challenge the coaching staff in an appropriate manner would really improve, I believe, our community. Experimenting in novelty. As Goldstein states, this is a web of positive and negative feedback among components of the organization. So again, welcoming athlete feedback on coaching staff and coaching style. This is very important, especially right now. We're in a very different situation with COVID and how our games and practices and even travel has been handled. And so it's important that we have both positive and negative feedback from our athletes, and as well as addressing the culture that is happening on our team. So some days it may be good, some days it may be bad. What is that? We need to know that from our athletes, and having that open communication wavelength between them, while also ending groupthink. We have been doing things very similarly the past 5 to 10 years, and so maybe having a player or a freshman even that challenges what we have always done in the past. Encouraging positive deviance. So Goldstein talks about these 6 Ds: define, determine, discover, design, discern, and disseminate. This is really important for me to be able to do within our community of interest so that I am being a better leader. So defining maybe what an issue or an experiment that we're trying, determining if this is the best option, and so forth. Leading through smart networks. So again, this is going to be very important that all voices on our coaching staff is heard. All the way from our student assistants who are not paid, they're doing all of this based on volunteer, all the way up to our first assistant and head coach. So this is going to be that cluster, right, that has maybe a weak link. We need to bring those into the center, create that communication no matter the level of your position within the coaching staff. Also, that all players' opinions are heard as well. And this is something that I really hope to do a better job of in my leadership process, is even the players who do not play, they really bring important things to the table. And so addressing their needs and what their thoughts are important as well, and bringing that network to the center instead of them just kind of being on the outside. So what strategies will I utilize to make this more efficient in my community and just my leadership in general? Really apply, and not only apply, but embrace the complexity science theory. Um, it is very difficult because it challenges a lot of the usual way of doing things, and so I really appreciate that. And so continuing that in my leadership process and embracing that, continually practicing the situational approach. It is hard because that means you have to get to know every single one of your followers, but it is very important to do so. Practicing consistency in my leadership, also self-evaluation. I feel as though this is very important, just in the workplace, but especially in your leadership practice as well. If you're wanting to grow, you really need to self-evaluate how your leadership practice was that day. Maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. What did you feel like went well? What do you need to adjust moving on into the future to create the best experience for your followers? And then really following my I will statements and sticking to my core values in my leadership process. And so here are my references.